"You're fired, Brian." Andrew Montclair didn't whisper it. He bellowed it across the open floor like he was announcing quarterly earnings, projecting confidence, control, and consequence to anyone within earshot. His voice sliced through the ambient hum of keyboards and hushed calls, ricocheting off glass partitions and bouncing into the break room where someone dropped a mug. It carried all the way to the conference area, where 3 junior analysts froze mid-conversation, coffee cups halfway to their lips, eyes wide with the sudden understanding that they were witnessing something performative and dangerous. He wanted everyone to hear. That was the point. This wasn't just termination, it was theater, a public demonstration of power designed to send a message. The old ways are dead. I am the future. I was standing near my desk, coffee still warm in my hand, when he approached with that particular stride, the one that telegraphed dominance before words even formed. Shoulders back, chin elevated, eyes scanning for witnesses like a lion marking territory. He didn't walk. He advanced, every step calibrated to maximize visibility, to ensure no one missed the moment he dismantled a decade of institutional memory with a single sentence. "You're done here," he continued, planting himself directly in my path, blocking my return to my chair as if I were already trespassing. "This organization requires agility, and frankly, you represent everything we're moving away from." I set my coffee down carefully. The ceramic mug made a small, deliberate sound against the desk surface. Click, like a period at the end of a sentence no one else had heard yet. "Say that again," I replied. My tone stayed level, not defiant, not pleading, just clear, calm, present. Andrew's smile sharpened, a predator's grin, thin and cold. "You heard me correctly. Your approach is antiquated. Your methods create bottlenecks. The executive team brought me in specifically to eliminate inefficiencies, and you, Brian, are the textbook definition of operational drag." Around us, the office went still. Keyboards fell silent. Phones stayed pressed to ears, but no one was listening to their calls anymore. The air thickened with the tension of forced normalcy, the kind where people pretend to work while their minds race with fear and calculation. The floor had that particular quality of false activity, fingers tapping, screens scrolling, eyes darting, but no real work happening. Just survival theater. "I've been granted complete authority to restructure leadership as needed," Andrew announced louder now, turning slightly as if addressing an invisible audience. "The board understands that transformation requires difficult decisions. Removing obstacles is part of my mandate." Obstacles. That's what he called people who actually understood how things functioned. People who knew which server room powered the client portal, which vendor contract included hidden renewal traps, which fire suppression system had failed inspection last year. To him, knowledge wasn't an asset, it was friction. I asked a simple question. "Who authorized this termination?" He waved dismissively, like I'd asked about the weather or the lunch menu. "This isn't a negotiation, Brian. Leadership transitions don't require your approval. You're operational staff, replaceable by design." The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Replaceable. I almost laughed. I was director of operations and infrastructure. For 11 years, I had built the framework that kept Pinnacle Technologies running when hypergrowth threatened to tear it apart from the inside. I negotiated facility agreements that saved millions. I restructured vendor relationships so we wouldn't bleed cash during downturns. I designed fail-safes into every critical system, not for show, but because I'd seen what happened when companies treated infrastructure as an afterthought. When this company was held together with hope, duct tape, and venture capital, I was the one who made sure the foundation didn't crack. While others chased headlines, I walked basements checking HVAC units. While executives debated brand colors, I ensured the data center wouldn't overheat during peak load. And Andrew Montclair? He'd been here 9 weeks. He gestured toward IT, who stood awkwardly near the printer station, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. "Revoke his credentials immediately." My access badge beeped once, red, and died. My laptop screen flickered, email refreshed, displayed an hourglass icon for 3 seconds, then locked completely with a stern message, "Account deactivated. Contact HR." Someone from HR approached quietly, clipboard in hand, eyes fixed on her shoes. "You'll need to collect your personal items now," she said, avoiding eye contact like I was contagious. Andrew looked pleased with himself. He turned to no one in particular and declared, "We move decisively here. That's what progress looks like." I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't make a scene. Instead, I packed methodically. My leather-bound notebook filled with years of handwritten process maps, color-coded, indexed, annotated with lessons learned from outages no one else remembered. The charging cables I'd bought myself because procurement always took weeks to approve a $20 request. A small framed photo from the year we finally secured Series B funding, arms around teammates who'd since left or been optimized out. Back then, we thought we'd made it. We had no idea how fragile success really was. Around me, the office resumed motion, keyboards clacking, chairs rolling, voices lowering back into professional murmurs, relief mixed with anxiety in the air, the grateful mathematics of not being next. No one met my eyes, not out of malice, but self-preservation. Before leaving, I pulled out my personal phone, still connected, still mine, and composed a single email to the board's executive secretary. No explanations, no emotion, no accusations, just a subject line that read, "Notice of contractual adjustment, effective tomorrow morning." I pressed send. Andrew Montclair believed he had just cleared a roadblock on his path to operational excellence. He thought he'd removed dead weight, streamlined the org chart, proved his decisiveness. He had absolutely no idea what mechanism he'd just triggered. Because what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the building we all worked in didn't belong to Pinnacle Technologies. It belonged to a holding entity I'd structured during the company's most precarious financial year. An entity I controlled, one with ironclad governance clauses tied to executive instability. And Andrew, in his eagerness to prove he was in charge, had just signed the memo that activated them. He mistook silence for surrender, calm for compliance. But I wasn't defeated. I was calculating. By the time I reached my vehicle, the initial sting of humiliation had transformed into something denser, quieter, more enduring. Awareness, not explosive anger, not theatrical rage, but the slow, grinding clarity that comes from watching a decade of competence dismissed by someone who couldn't find the emergency generator on a floor plan. I didn't cry, didn't call former colleagues to vent, didn't draft angry manifestos in notes. I sat in the driver's seat, engine off, and let memory do the work. Pinnacle nearly imploded 9 years ago. Cash reserves evaporated through poorly negotiated leases, bloated service contracts, and operational shortcuts that looked economical until they failed spectacularly, like the cloud migration that crashed customer billing for 72 hours. While executives debated mission statements and rebranded the logo, I renegotiated everything that kept the lights on. I reduced operating expenses by 34% without sacrificing uptime. I extended payment schedules, renegotiated SLAs, and stabilized margins long enough for revenue to catch up. That wasn't strategic theater. That was organizational survival. When we outgrew our original location, I personally selected this headquarters. I walked every square foot with structural engineers, municipal inspectors, and commercial attorneys. I insisted on redundant power feeds, seismic bracing, and fiber conduits that could handle 10 times our projected load. I signed the facility agreement after 8 months of negotiation, locking in terms that gave us flexibility during slowdowns and leverage during growth. Nobody questioned those decisions then. They were too busy celebrating expansion milestones, popping champagne over headcount doubling. Andrew Montclair never witnessed any of that history. He came from management consulting, the kind where confidence matters more than consequences, where PowerPoint slides substitute for real-world testing. He spoke fluently in efficiency metrics, competitive benchmarks, and manufactured urgency. To him, every established process looked like bureaucratic excess. Every precaution looked like timidity. Operations weren't infrastructure to him. They were overhead waiting to be optimized. I remembered him saying it once in a leadership meeting. Facilities. People are fundamentally interchangeable. He'd smiled like he'd made an insightful observation rather than revealing profound ignorance. I kept my expression neutral. Experience had taught me that reacting only encouraged people like Andrew. They feed on emotion. They mistake outrage for weakness. In meetings, he questioned why we maintained redundancy, why systems were built for longevity instead of rapid scalability. He praised lean methodologies and mocked conservative planning as fear-based. When something worked quietly, like the backup cooling system that kicked in during last summer's heat wave, he ignored it. When it required visible investment, like upgrading aging electrical panels, he targeted it for cuts. That was his conception of leadership: remove anything that didn't scream its value in real time. What hurt most wasn't the termination itself. It was the erasure, the way 11 years of institutional knowledge were reduced to a line item on his transformation spreadsheet, the way competence was reframed as resistance, the way loyalty was recast as complacency. I absorbed it silently because emotional responses would only validate his narrative. He needed me to be angry, defensive, petty, to prove his point that I was stuck in the past. But I knew better. What Andrew never did was read beyond executive summaries. He skimmed contractual documents. He trusted assumptions over verification. He believed authority replaced understanding, that speed equaled competence, that disruption demonstrated intelligence. People like Andrew always believed those things. Sitting in my car, replaying his words, I remembered the clause buried deep in the facility documentation, the provision tied to governance changes, the one no consultant ever read carefully. Andrew thought he had eliminated a cost center. He had no idea what he'd just activated within the structural foundation of everything. Clarity arrived after the noise faded. Anger gave way to calculation, and calculation was where I operated best. I didn't rush. I opened the files I knew intimately, the ones I'd assembled meticulously while everyone else chased quarterly targets. The building everyone called headquarters never belonged to Pinnacle Technologies. It couldn't have. When we signed the original agreement, our balance sheet was fragile and institutional lenders were nervous. Direct ownership would have killed the financing deal entirely. So I structured a hybrid arrangement, a property-holding entity with patient capital and ironclad governance provisions. I controlled that entity. The company leased space from it at arm's length, fully disclosed, approved by counsel, and renewed twice without commentary. I remembered those negotiation weeks like they happened yesterday. Environmental inspections, zoning contingencies, tax abatements, escalation limitations. I wrote the operational schedules myself because I understood how infrastructure failures cascaded through organizations. Cooling systems, power redundancy, access control, backup generators. The lease mirrored operational requirements rather than the inverse. That specificity mattered. Buried past the executive summaries sat a clause everyone skimmed during approval. If changes in executive governance materially altered operational structure, rental rates could be adjusted to current market benchmarks within 24 hours of notification. It wasn't punitive. It was protective, a safeguard against reckless leadership that treated infrastructure as expendable. Legal reviewed it. The board approved it. Nobody objected because nobody expected it would ever become relevant. Andrew didn't read that section. He never did. He trusted briefing documents and authority letters and momentum. When he discussed eliminating facilities overhead, he assumed contracts were static. He assumed ownership equaled leverage. He assumed incorrectly. The timing was perfect. Earlier that morning, Andrew had circulated a memo titled Executive Restructuring Authority. It appeared harmless, procedural, empowering. He signed it and secured the chairman's countersignature. With that signature, he formally altered governance in ways that directly impacted operational structure. He did it to appear decisive, to demonstrate authority, to move fast. I watched the elements align without emotion. The holding entity's contractual rights were unambiguous. The notification window was clean. Market comparables were current and documented. I didn't need permission. I needed precision. I drafted the notice once, then revised it 3 more times, eliminating every adjective until only facts remained. Addressed properly, delivered correctly, effective tomorrow morning. Control isn't loud, it's quiet and documented. By the time I closed the folder, the outcome was no longer theoretical. It was procedural reality already in motion. I stayed calm because calm maintains sharpness. Every step followed documentation, not pride. The lease permitted adjustment. The governance change triggered it. The market established the number. Nothing personal, nothing rushed, just cause-meeting effect. Andrew believed control came from titles and mandates. I knew it lived in signatures, clauses, and timing. Tomorrow would demonstrate which belief actually governed reality. I'd been preparing for this outcome for years, even if I never expected to use it. Now preparation was about to meet opportunity, and the result would be entirely predictable for anyone who actually read contracts. Don't leave, yet. The next section is where everything begins shifting. Precision matters when pressure builds. I didn't write the notification in anger. I composed it the way contractual mechanisms are meant to be activated: clean, narrow, irrefutable. The email went out at 10:47 a.m., addressed to the property lease administrator with copies to every relevant stakeholder. The subject line was deliberately mundane. Rental rate adjustment, effective notification. The body contained 2 paragraphs. The first stated the adjustment. Effective in 24 hours, base rent would increase by 400%, recalculated to current metropolitan market benchmarks for comparable Class A commercial space. The second paragraph cited the specific clause, section number, page reference, subsection letter. That was all. I added recipients strategically: every voting board member, the chief financial officer, internal legal counsel, the external law firm of record. No drama, just visibility. If anyone attempted to claim surprise later, the documentation would contradict them. Within minutes, my phone began vibrating. I didn't answer. The initial calls would be noise. Panic always precedes comprehension. The CFO left a voicemail, voice tight with controlled alarm. "Brian, this has to be some kind of error. Call me immediately." Legal followed, more measured. "We've received your notification. Reviewing the documentation now." I remained still. I opened the lease agreement again, scrolling slowly through familiar language. Not because I needed reassurance, I knew every word, but because repetition sharpens confidence. The clause was exactly where I remembered it. Clear trigger language, clear remedy, clear timeline, clear enforcement mechanism. An hour later, legal called back. The tone had shifted entirely. "We've completed our review," the attorney said carefully. "The notification complies with lease terms as written." I asked one question: "Is the adjustment enforceable?" There was a pause, the kind that means someone is choosing words with extreme care. "Yes," the attorney said, "it is enforceable." That was the moment everything shifted from theoretical to actual. By mid-afternoon, Andrew's number illuminated my screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering. He didn't bother with preliminaries. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "You can't just quadruple our rent. That's extortion." "I didn't," I replied evenly. "The contract did." "You're trying to sabotage the company," he snapped. "This is retaliation. It's unethical." "No," I said. "You changed governance. The clause adjusted pricing. That's how binding agreements function." He accused me of manipulation, of vindictiveness, of playing games with organizational stability. I let him finish his entire tirade without interrupting. Then I said calmly, "This isn't personal, Andrew. It's procedural." Silence followed, heavy, disbelieving. The sound of someone realizing control was never where they thought it was. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. The leverage was no longer theoretical. It was active, documented, and acknowledged by legal counsel. Nothing I did from that point forward would alter the outcome. The mechanism was engaged, and the company was now operating on terms it had agreed to long before Andrew arrived. From that moment on, every decision inside those walls would be constrained by mathematics, contracts, and time, not slogans, not authority, not momentum. And I intended to let that reality apply steady, unavoidable pressure until consequences reached the people who believed speed replaced responsibility. The beautiful thing about contractual leverage is its emotional neutrality. It doesn't care about fairness or feelings or who deserves what. It simply executes according to terms everyone already accepted. Andrew had triggered it himself. Now, he would learn what happens when assumptions meet documentation. Chaos doesn't announce itself loudly at first. It seeps. The morning after my notification went out, Andrew Montclair demonstrated that principle faster than any business school case study. My phone rang before dawn, his name flashing like an alarm. I let it ring, knowing silence would unsettle him more than any conversation. When I finally answered, he exploded. "You think this is clever?" he shouted. "You're trying to destroy the company." His voice fractured between rage and something closer to fear, the sound of someone realizing control was slipping. He threatened lawsuits, personal liability claims, professional blacklisting. I said nothing until he paused for breath. Then I replied simply, "Read the lease." He hung up. Inside Pinnacle, confusion spread rapidly. The CFO discovered what Andrew never bothered to confirm. Relocation wasn't possible in the short term. Every suitable alternative space required months of municipal approvals, environmental inspections, and capital commitments they didn't have. Worse, several major client contracts explicitly tied service continuity to the registered operating address. Relocate the facility, breach the agreements. I heard the CFO say it during a frantic conference call. "We can't simply move," he said, frustration evident. "The address is locked into compliance filings, vendor agreements, client contracts." Someone asked how long they had before the increase took effect. His answer was blunt, "Not long." Andrew tried projecting confidence anyway. He called an emergency leadership meeting and declared the rental adjustment temporary friction. He told executives to maintain focus and accused me of overplaying my hand. Behind closed doors, his confidence evaporated. Emails flew with red priority flags, calendars filled with crisis meetings. Nobody had a solution that didn't require time they no longer possessed. By mid-afternoon, the bank called. Not Andrew, not legal. The bank called the finance department directly. "We're reviewing your exposure," the relationship manager said. A sudden cost increase of this magnitude raises questions about liquidity and operational stability. That single sentence changed everything. The moment the word liquidity entered conversations, panic went public. Credit terms tightened. Vendors began asking for reassurances. One quietly requested advance payment on pending invoices. Andrew started calling repeatedly, his tone shifting from threats to bargaining. "We can talk," he said during one call. "You don't have to do this, Brian." I listened, calm and detached. This wasn't escalation. This was consequence unfolding exactly as designed. The company wasn't collapsing because of me. It was unraveling because Andrew mistook authority for understanding, speed for strategy, disruption for competence. The chaos he felt wasn't an attack. It was exposure, spreading faster than he could contain it. And it had only just begun. I knew the pressure would force decisions, and decisions would reveal competence or its absence. Andrew had chosen momentum over foundation, volume over substance. Now every unanswered question multiplied. I stayed silent, not from fear, but patience, letting the system respond exactly as it was built to respond, without urgency, without mercy, without intervention. The machinery of consequence doesn't require supervision, it just requires activation. And Andrew had activated it himself the moment he decided termination was easier than conversation. If you were in my position at this moment, what would you do? Leave a comment below and let me know. Pressure makes people reckless. By the second day, Andrew Montclair abandoned pretense and went straight to confrontation. He wanted a reversal, and he wanted it immediately. HR called first. The director spoke carefully, as if every word was being recorded for litigation. "Andrew has requested we issue a formal clarification," she said. "He wants it stated explicitly that you no longer hold any operational authority connected to the company." I didn't raise my voice. "I don't hold any," I replied calmly. "I'm not an employee." There was a pause. Papers rustled in the background. "He's insisting that your actions constitute abuse of insider control," she continued. that you're weaponizing privileged influence. Ask him to define insider, I said, then call me back. 10 minutes later, Andrew called himself. You're overstepping, he snapped. You don't get to weaponize assets against the company. I'm enforcing a contract, I said, one you're bound by. You're acting like you still run operations, he shot back. HR agrees you don't have any authority here. I agree completely, I said, which is why conflict of interest doesn't apply. He laughed, sharp, humorless, desperate. My attorneys are drafting papers as we speak, he said. You'll be sued for tortious interference. Good, I replied. Make sure they review the termination timestamp carefully. That silenced him for half a second. Legal confirmed it later that afternoon. My attorney called, with the particular tone lawyers use when things are airtight. You're no longer an employee, he said. You have no fiduciary duty to the company. Exercising contractual rights as a controlling party in a separate property entity does not constitute interference. So there's no conflict? I asked. None, he said. They don't have a case. Andrew didn't like that answer. He tried a different approach. He pushed HR to circulate an internal memo questioning my authority retroactively, something vague enough to alarm junior staff but legally meaningless. It backfired immediately. Legal flagged it within minutes. Do not distribute, they wrote, unsupported and potentially defamatory. That's when Andrew rushed. And rushing creates errors. In his panic to regain leverage, Andrew approved a supplemental financial agreement tied to short-term liquidity relief. He didn't read it closely. He delegated review to a junior associate and signed electronically to maintain momentum. The document referenced the lease adjustment as uncontested, incorporating it into financial forecasts and compliance filings. He had just validated the adjustment in writing while simultaneously trying to escape it. That wasn't strategy. That was desperation. When I saw the signature on that document, I felt nothing dramatic, just quiet confirmation. Andrew called one last time that evening, voice strained. We can still fix this, he said. We can negotiate. I answered honestly. You already made it worse. Silence followed, the kind that means someone is finally realizing the fight they picked was never about force or authority. It was about precision, and they'd already lost control of it. Andrew had confused volume with power, titles with leverage, speed with competence. Now he was learning the difference, one contractual clause at a time. And there was nothing left to negotiate. Collapse doesn't announce itself with drama. It spreads through invoices, calendars, and quiet decisions made in conference rooms. By the third day, the consequences of Andrew's choices moved faster than anyone could manage. I watched it unfold without comment, not from cruelty, but clarity. This was systems failing in predictable patterns when leadership mistakes authority for understanding. The first visible cracks came from suppliers. Longtime vendors began requesting advance payment before shipments. One email read, "Given recent volatility in your operational structure, revised payment terms will apply immediately." Another followed within an hour, then another. What Andrew had dismissed as temporary noise was now eroding trust, and trust is expensive to rebuild. Operations felt it next. 2 senior managers resigned within hours of each other. No speeches, no ultimatums, just brief notices citing organizational instability and personal reasons. They had reputations to protect. Staying meant defending decisions they hadn't made. Leaving was quieter. Clients noticed before leadership admitted anything was wrong. A major account paused its contract renewal, requesting written assurances that service continuity wouldn't be disrupted. Legal couldn't provide them. Compliance filings listed the headquarters address, and any uncertainty around that address triggered mandatory review. The pause spread. One delay invited another. Uncertainty became contagious. Andrew tried rallying confidence. He sent company-wide emails about resilience and momentum and staying focused. They were ignored. Meetings ended early. Video cameras stayed off. People don't need instructions when they sense gravity shifting. The company's entire posture changed from aggressive to defensive in less than 48 hours. Finance tightened approvals. Procurement stalled pending orders. Every decision waited on another decision that never arrived. Momentum, Andrew's favorite word, vanished completely. Then the board stepped in. An emergency meeting was scheduled for that evening. Invitations went out, quietly, precisely, selectively. I received one. Andrew did not. His name was absent from the agenda entirely. No presentation slot, no opening remarks, just a note stating attendance was limited to voting members and invited participants. That was the moment the collapse became official. I didn't celebrate. I observed. This was what happened when leadership confused authority with understanding, when someone removed the wrong person, stressed the wrong structure, and triggered damage that cascaded without emotion. The lesson I carried forward was simple. Power isn't proven by how fast you act, but by how well what you build survives after you leave. Andrew moved quickly. The organization couldn't keep up. Nobody asked me to intervene. Nobody could. The system was past correction, running on inertia and clauses already triggered. Calls overlapped, documents revised themselves, silence replaced authority. This wasn't revenge. It was mathematics catching up, line by line, consequence. Following decision with no room left for negotiation. Nothing here required emotion anymore. It didn't require permission or escalation. It just required time. By the time I joined the board call, the company was already bracing for impact. The chain reaction was complete. All that remained was accountability, and it was arriving without mercy. When the virtual boardroom opened, the noise finally had shape, not panic, not anger, focus, the kind that settles when consequences become unavoidable. I took a seat at my desk, camera on, microphone muted until needed. No greetings, because greetings would have implied negotiation. Andrew spoke first. He always did. This situation was created by a former employee acting in bad faith, he said, eyes fixed somewhere off camera. He's exploiting legacy access to harm the company deliberately. Nobody interrupted. I waited until he finished his prepared statement. Then I shared my screen and displayed 3 documents. I won't editorialize, I said. These speak clearly on their own. The lease came first. Highlighted sections, clean navigation tabs, signatures intact and time-stamped. I explained who owned the property entity, how the structure had been disclosed during formation, and when the board had approved it. No embellishment, just dates, initials, and document references. Next came the email chain. Timestamped notifications, delivery confirmations, legal acknowledgments. Each message showed notification, response, and validation. The timeline was linear, boring, and completely airtight. Finally, the clause Andrew never read. The adjustment language was brief, unemotional, and precise, triggered by governance change, enforced by market benchmarks, executed within contractual parameters. Andrew shifted in his chair. "He's twisting intent," he snapped. "This was never meant to be used like this." I looked directly at the camera. "Intent doesn't override language," I said. "You didn't just terminate me, Andrew. You destabilized the foundation your entire strategy stands on." That landed. The room, virtual as it was, went quiet. Not stunned. Settled, a few board members nodded slightly. One stopped taking notes entirely. Andrew tried again. "We needed speed," he said. He resisted necessary change. "I protected continuity," I replied. "You removed it." The board chair cleared her throat. "Andrew, we've reviewed the documents independently," she said. "Legal has confirmed their validity and enforceability." Andrew leaned toward his camera. "So what, you're siding with him?" "This isn't about sides," she answered. "It's about governance." She paused, then added carefully, "Andrew, please leave the call. We'll continue this discussion privately." His head snapped up. "Excuse me?" "Now," she said calmly. Andrew stared at the screen, anger flashing across his face, but he said nothing. His video feed went dark. Inside the virtual room, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Someone exhaled audibly. Another straightened their papers. The meeting continued without him. And for the first time since this began, the conversation felt balanced. Order returned, not because anyone raised their voice, but because facts had finally been allowed to sit where authority used to be. I sat still, hands folded, watching the system correct itself. No speeches followed. No apologies were offered. The board didn't need a formal motion to reach alignment. They needed clarity. Andrew's absence communicated more than any vote could. Decisions moved faster without him. Calmer, too. In that room, justice wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, measured, and irreversible. And everyone there understood the difference. It marked the end of impulse leadership and the quiet return of accountability the company had been missing for far too long. When the vote concluded, there was no applause, no sighs of relief, no murmurs of vindication. Just a brief, heavy pause, the kind that follows not a climax but a correction, like the quiet after a circuit breaker resets, restoring current without fanfare. Then the board chair spoke with deliberate calm. "Andrew Montclair is removed from his position effective immediately," she said, "cited for governance failure and material risk exposure." The words were clinical, unemotional, exactly how accountability sounds when it finally arrives, not as punishment, but as fact. Like stating the weather after a storm has passed, it rained, the ground is wet. Andrew didn't argue. According to people who were on the call, he simply stared at his screen as if it had betrayed him. His reflection frozen in disbelief, mouth slightly open, eyes wide with the dawning horror that his authority had never been real. It had been borrowed, provisional, contingent on competence he never possessed. Then, without another word, he disconnected. His video feed vanished, his microphone went dark, no dramatic exit, no last plea. Just silence where arrogance once lived. No escort was required, no HR representative needed to walk him out. He'd already been ejected, not by force, but by consequence. The system had rejected him like a body rejecting a foreign object. No dignity salvaged, no legacy preserved, just a name erased from the org chart before the meeting even adjourned. And yet, the moment his presence lifted, something shifted in the virtual room. The air itself seemed to exhale. The frantic energy that had poisoned every decision he touched, the manufactured urgency, the performative confidence, the brittle insistence that speed equaled strategy, evaporated instantly. In its place settled something rare in modern corporate life: clarity. The CFO straightened his notes. Legal began outlining next steps with measured precision. Someone, quietly, respectfully, asked about vendor communications and client reassurances. These weren't crisis questions, they were operational questions, the kind that signal recovery instead of panic, the kind that assume continuity is possible, because the foundation hasn't crumbled. I listened, detached but attentive, watching the company settle back into rhythm. Not the chaotic rhythm Andrew had imposed, a staccato beat of disruption and fear, but the steady, reliable pulse of systems functioning as designed. It was almost musical, calm, coherent. Then the chair turned her attention to me. "Brian," she said carefully, "we'd like to discuss the lease." She paused, choosing her words like someone handling fragile glass. "The adjustment is valid. We've confirmed that with legal 3 times. But we're hoping to renegotiate terms that work for everyone." I nodded. "I'm open to conversation," I replied. "Not a rollback, but conversation." There was no pressure, no veiled threats, no appeals to loyalty or nostalgia, just recognition. They finally understood. Leverage wasn't aggression, it wasn't personal. It was preparation meeting consequence, and consequences, once set in stone. Motion by contract don't negotiate, they execute. We spent the next hour discussing timelines, market benchmarks, oversight safeguards. The numbers softened, not because I relented, but because fairness emerged once emotion was stripped away. The structure improved, clarity replaced ambiguity. Stability returned, one clause at a time. Someone finally asked the question they'd been circling since the rent notice hit. "Brian," the chair said, her voice low but steady, "would you consider returning in an operational capacity?" I shook my head. "No," I said. That answer surprised them more than the 400% rent increase ever had. They expected demands, a seat at the table, a title, a say in leadership. But I'd already done my part. I'd built the scaffolding that kept this company standing through near collapse, through expansion, through executive whims. I'd served not for glory, but for function. And now, what I wanted wasn't authority. It was distance. Control didn't require a title, I explained without bitterness. It never really had. We finalized a revised lease framework before adjourning. Fair terms, transparent reporting, audit rights, escalation triggers tied to actual performance metrics, not executive ego. Most importantly, the language granting any single leader full restructuring authority was excised entirely. No more unchecked transformations, no more vision without accountability. The board had learned at great cost that innovation without infrastructure is just noise. As I closed my laptop, nothing dramatic happened. No congratulatory messages flooded my inbox. No former colleagues called to apologize or thank me. That was fine. Justice rarely announces itself with fanfare. It settles quietly, like a system returning to specification after a long deviation, like a building settling into its foundation after an earthquake. Andrew Montclair believed leadership meant momentum without friction. The board believed governance meant protection without ego. I believed contracts told the truth long after people stopped listening. Walking away from my desk that evening, I felt satisfaction without triumph. No adrenaline, no schadenfreude. Just the deep, quiet certainty that the structure held. The damage stopped. Order had been restored, not because I won, but because reality had been allowed to take control again, exactly where it belonged. I didn't need recognition, didn't crave credit. Revenge had never been the point. What I needed, and what I now had, was proof that preparation outlasts impulse, that patience outmaneuvers panic, that the person who reads the fine print, who builds quietly, who plans for worst-case scenarios while others celebrate best-case fantasies, that person holds the real power. Peace arrived quietly after the meetings concluded. No follow-up calls demanding explanations, no media leaks, no internal memos spinning narratives, just documents moving. Through proper channels, signatures collected, amendments filed, decisions implemented without spectacle. That calm told me everything I needed to know. Within a week, the board approved the revised lease terms. The rent was no longer punitive. It reflected actual Class A market rates in the metro area, with annual adjustments tied to verified indices. But it remained firm. Because stability requires boundaries, and boundaries require enforcement. Transparency was written into every section: monthly occupancy reports, quarterly infrastructure audits, immediate notification rights if executive turnover exceeded predefined thresholds. Vague authority was replaced with clear limits. No more transformation mandates signed in haste. No more consultants handed the keys to the kingdom. Most importantly, the clause that had protected the company all along, the one Andrew never read, was preserved, strengthened, and made visible to all future executives, a permanent reminder. Infrastructure is not overhead. It is the bedrock. I signed the new agreement without ceremony. It wasn't a concession, it was a correction. The company didn't need a savior. It needed discipline, and the lease would now do what it was always meant to do: enforce discipline when enthusiasm outran judgment. People assumed I'd demand something in return: a board seat, an advisory role, a golden parachute wrapped in influence. I didn't. Control no longer interested me. What mattered was influence through structure, quieter, slower, but far more durable than any title could ever be. I chose distance because distance keeps perspective clean. Up close, emotions blur judgment. From afar, patterns emerge. And the pattern was clear. Organizations thrive not on charisma, but on continuity. The company adjusted quickly after that. Vendors resumed normal payment terms within days. Clients lifted their contract pauses and renewed with multi-year commitments. Internal calendars filled not with emergency huddles, but with planning sessions, maintenance reviews, and team retrospectives. Routine returned, and routine, in its unglamorous way, is the heartbeat of resilience. Nobody mentioned Andrew's name, not out of malice, but irrelevance. Systems don't mourn removed components. They rebalance and continue. His absence wasn't a void. It was a relief. I visited the building one last time after the paperwork cleared. Not to reminisce, not to inspect, just to confirm what I already knew. I walked through the lobby, past the security desk, up the elevator to the operations floor, the hum of servers, the soft glow of status lights, the smell of coffee and ozone. Everything was stable, predictable, boring in the best possible way. This wasn't revenge. It was alignment restored. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't issued threats, hadn't demanded apologies. I'd simply trusted the work I'd done years ago, when no one was watching, when no one cared. When I sat, alone in conference rooms, drafting clauses that seemed excessive, paranoid, unnecessary. Until they weren't. Nothing else needed proving. The leverage had done its work quietly, completely. What remained was a functioning organization and a clear boundary between leadership and ownership, one defined not by personalities, but by contracts, not by ego, but by limits. Boundaries that would last longer than any executive mandate ever could. As I left the building for the final time, I felt no need to look back. Outcomes don't require witnesses. The truth had already settled into the foundation, into the steel beams, the fiber lines, the lease agreements, the quiet architecture of consequence. Andrew thought he ran the company. I owned the floor he stood on. And that was enough.